why do we still hate this guy so much? Now, for some of you, this might be the easiest wrestling question you've ever had to answer. And for others, this is difficult only because you're trying to figure out which reason to start with first. Now, before either of you go clacking away in the comments section, I want you to take the time and really think about this answer, because if you do, I think it'll tell us a lot more about us as wrestling fans and even us as a society. And that's exactly why I think this question needs to be the topic of this episode. Because today, on the Raw Netflix debut, Hulk Hogan was booed out of the building, as the phrase goes. And this was so bad that it was even covered in mainstream media outlets, with some of them asking audiences to just leave Hulk Hogan alone.
It was likely because he decided to get involved in politics.
And that's really quite sad considering how high the mighty have fallen, since this is the wrestler that has launched mainstream wrestling to where it is today. But how did this happen? Well, when we stop to consider some of the reasons that people often give, and then look at those compared to other wrestlers, we'll see that things don't always add up in equal doses. And what is the difference between Hogan and everybody else is the biggest question I have for this entire scenario. And in that case, we better start examining this whole thing right now. As the awesome Ron Hawthorne has said on multiple occasions, there are more people in the internet wrestling community that are willing to forgive and defend Chris Benoit than Hulk Hogan. Would you rather someone call you a racial slur or strangle you with a Bowflex? And that's really weird when you consider that Hogan has definitely committed the lesser of the two crimes, especially since what Chris Benoit did was actually 3 crimes, and what Hulk Hogan did wasn't a crime. He was actually the victim of 2 crimes, since the footage was leaked illegally and recorded illegally. Now, just to be clear, I am not condoning what Hulk Hogan said or did, and I'm also one of those people who still like Chris Benoit anyway. I'm just saying that the whole thing is really weird when you stop to think about it that way. Furthermore, let's look at some other wrestlers who have done some horrific things, such as Stone Cold Steve Austin, who again, despite doing what he did, which I am not defending or condoning, he is still my favorite wrestler of all time. My point is, it's really weird that when it comes to certain wrestlers, we're very easy to overlook their personal behavior outside of the ring, but with others, we hold them accountable to it. And let's be clear, Hogan's not the only wrestler to ever have some racially charged accusations thrown at him,
as Vince had said the same exact word as Hogan on air.
And there are those who will say, well, that was part of a broadcast, therefore it's a little more acceptable. Well, what about other wrestlers such as Michael Hayes or Tessa Blanchard? Neither of them seem to get the amount of vitriol that Hulk Hogan does. And don't even get me started on Dick Murdoch, who allegedly was a member of the Klan. And if you recall in that video how Hulk Hogan actually used that specific term, well then you know that he was saying it as part of a joke. Again, not condoning it, but just saying that that is a much less egregious action than being a part of the KKK. But now, putting all that aside, I'm not actually convinced that that leaked video is the reason why Hulk Hogan got the reception that he did on Netflix. In the years since that video has been released, there have been times where Hogan received a much less angry reception, and in some cases, even mildly cheered. This major boo fest was definitely a huge ramp up from his previous appearances on WWE television. I wonder what recently could have happened to make such a huge difference. Okay, now I don't like talking about politics because I feel that people get all invested in it and get all angry about it are, well, just a bunch of marks. So I'm telling you right now, I don't care who you voted for, I don't care how you feel about the subject, this is not what this video is about. But having said that, we do have to bring up the red elephant in the room. That's Hulk Hogan making his appearance at the Republican National Convention, which yet again was covered by mainstream media. Now, this glowing presidential endorsement has many people thinking that this is why Hulk Hogan was booed so tremendously in Los Angeles, which is a pretty blue state. Now, I'm sure it didn't help Hulk Hogan's public persona, but I also don't think that it was a major reason behind the mass booing, considering that the candidate that he backed, well, won the election, and while California is pretty democratic, if you look at the breakdown of any state,
it's not 100% red or blue, and it can change over time.
Overall. And let's not pretend like Hulk Hogan is the only one in the wrestling world with the same political leanings. I mean, come on, Vince McMahon's friends with Donald Trump, and Linda McMahon even works for him. And as I said earlier, I think people who are really political are just a bunch of big marks. Well, let's talk about one big mark in particular, Mark Calloway, as the Phenom is also a very vocal Trump supporter himself, but yet where's all the big public backlash for him? It just doesn't exist for some reason, which I find odd, especially considering how crazy people get over politics. But again, I just don't get it. These politicians are all a bunch of liars. But then again, maybe lying is exactly what this all has to do with. It's weird in a business that is specifically designed to lie to you that many fans really crave honesty. Between shoot interviews and podcasts, we never really know when we're being worked or not, but nevertheless, a lot of fans take it upon themselves to find out the truth. Or at least try to. And out of all the bits of reality that fans are trying to seek, well, one of the biggest ones is a genuine apology from the real American himself. And the problem is, a lot of people out there don't feel that they ever got that. They don't feel that Terry Bollea has ever been genuinely apologetic for any of his negative actions. Although, we should point out that feeling that someone is genuinely sorry is a subjective matter, as we can't really prove that by fact. Just saying. But what makes it really hard to take Hulk Hogan seriously is all of the egregious lies he's told over the years. From allegedly playing in the band Metallica, wrestling more days in a year than actually exists, and supposedly being the original candidate to sponsor the George Foreman Grill. I mean, his name is right in the product. Patreon shout out to Dakari Garmin, who can eat Taco Bell without it coming crashing down and hurting inside. Ron Hawthorne, who has a 25-inch python in his pants. Mangy Stray, what you gonna do when Mangy Mania runs wild on you? Miss you, buddy. And Harry Flynn, who could have booed Hulk Hogan louder than that entire Netflix audience combined. As well as another thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Thank you for keeping me going. Anyway, like the boy who cried wolf, it's really hard to trust somebody when they've been so full of it for so long. And the weirder thing is that it's Hulk Hogan, the proclaimed Babe Ruth of professional wrestling. When you've done all that he has, when you have the legacy that he has, why would you bother to tell lies? Why would you bother to inflate the truth? You don't have to. But I do have to say, there's a big difference between Hulk Hogan saying that he tore the muscles off of both of his arms, body slamming Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, versus him claiming that he didn't take steroids. As with the Andre thing, that's him protecting kayfabe, protecting the business, and protecting the industry is what a wrestler is supposed to do. On the other hand, the other kind of lies that Hulk Hogan tells, well, that's just him trying to make himself look good, and the reality is, it makes him look quite the opposite. Although, while it is true that Hulk Hogan does lie, that is something that only people like us know, as in fans. And fandom might actually be part of the problem. As wrestling fans, we are a fickle bunch, and we are also a very strict bunch. And nowadays, a lot of the wrestling superfans, we demand so much more from our wrestlers. Back in the day, a wrestler didn't have to be a technological marvel or jump out of the ring every single night in order to be considered a great by the most hardcore fan. But now, the internet wrestling community sure does have a very particular set of skills that they're looking for from their average wrestler. And it's safe to say Hulk Hogan really doesn't fit that bill, and he never had. And yes, as petty as it might seem, there are those out there who are going to hate Hulk Hogan simply because they don't like the way he wrestles. As a result, today there are a lot of fans out there who feel that Hogan is a relic of a forgotten time, that he's a dinosaur that never really worked, and his shtick really shouldn't apply in the modern era, and we're better off without putting him on a pedestal, despite him being the absolute icon that he is. While it is true that nobody would ever confuse Hulk Hogan for Kurt Angle in the ring, and yes, Hogan was more technical in Japan, you should also remember that this very specific criteria really only applies to a specific portion of the fan base, a very specific portion at that, even if they are very vocal. And we should also keep in mind that that mass public booing that Hogan had to endure wasn't just super fans, that was casuals too, as Hogan hatred extends far beyond that of the IWC. And so, while it is true that the Hulkster is not the best technical wrestler, and he had that tape leaked, and he has lied about steroids and a whole bunch of other things, the reality is a lot of these details are only things that super fans know about, and the anti-Hogan sentiment is so much further reaching than that, as it really has picked up mass appeal. But that is exactly what I think all this boils down to.
But the one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail.
Like it or not, Hulk Hogan is an absolute legend, and he's responsible for an entire generation of wrestling fans becoming wrestling fans. He made the WWF what it is today. It wouldn't have been the same without him, no matter what other people might claim. But as weird as it might seem, that might be his biggest downfall. While there are accusations out there that Dick Murdoch was in the Klan, and we know that The Undertaker is a Trump supporter, and we also know that Chris Benoit, did what he did. The truth is that Hulk Hogan is more famous than all of them. Even in the case of Austin, as over as he was and as much of a draw as he wasn't a hero. He wasn't a role model where people looked up to Hulk Hogan. And while sure, not all of you grew up with Hulkamania, you still understand Hulk Hogan's place in the Pantheon. You still understand his place in wrestling history.
Which makes it suck so much more to think some of that legacy was misplaced.
The truth is, Hulk Hogan is way more famous than all of them, and he's done way more for wrestling than any of them. But that's exactly why it comes crashing down so hard when you find out he's done the things that he's done. And even if you're not opposed to one thing, or you're willing to forgive another, he keeps adding on and piling up again and again and again, leaving us fans to ask, when is enough enough? How many more things can he do until we just have to boo him? Now look, for the record, I am going to say that I will always be appreciative of everything that Hulk Hogan did, and I myself was a little Hulkamaniac once upon a time. But I myself am still able to keep these worlds separate, to compartmentalize the person from the performer. However, I do understand if not everybody else can do the same. Well, there you go, my thoughts on Hulk Hogan getting booed out of the building. I want to give a big thank you to all my Patreon supporters, and I want to thank you for watching, and as always, Dave knows.